Today we are continuing with the list of the 357 best GRE words. This is a list of words compiled from those that have come up multiple times in official practice tests and in resources from Magoosh, Manhattan, etc. In the last video I did the letters A through C, and hopefully in this video I'll get through the letters D through F. I'm going to go relatively quickly, and some of these words I might not know, but I'm going to give you my initial definition, but you can of course see on screen what the official definition is. So we're going to start with decorum. Decorum is a manner of behavior. Good decorum, good behavior. Appropriateness is how I describe it. And they say appropriate behavior. I didn't even see that, but that's the official definition too. Appropriate behavior, good manners, decorum. Being decorous is another word. It means following good decorum. So that's a bonus word for you. Deference is respect that you would pay to someone. I defer to your wisdom. I show you deference, not that you're superior to me, but I respect your judgment. What do they say? Respect or polite submission. Yeah, so you're slightly saying that you're lower than the other person. To deflect is kind of like the word to reflect. It means to put back onto someone. They say something to you and you deflect it. You put it back on them. You toss it away from yourself so you don't receive the blow. You deflect it. To divert or cause to ricochet. Ricochet, by the way, means to bounce off something, like a bullet ricochets off a wall. Deftness is skill at something. So being good at something, being deft at poker, you're good at poker. Being a deft dart thrower, you're good at that. So basically, I would say just skill. Skill, acumen, manual dexterity. Yeah, often to do with manual or physical behaviors. Deft at skiing or something like that, rather than deft at coming up with plans or something. That's more of a mental thing. Deft is often to do with manual, physical things. To delineate, that's a great word. I use it quite a lot. It means to draw a line between. So to delineate your goals is to outline them. To delineate your side of the bed is to draw a line to make clear what your side of the bed is. Anytime you're drawing a line to show the boundaries of something, you're delineating it. What do they say? To describe very accurately, to clearly demarcate a boundary. Exactly. To demur is a great word. It means to kind of raise your hand in objection and say, no, I don't go along with that. I demur. I don't agree with what you guys are all saying. I demur from that. I object, as they say, or raise concerns. There you go. To denigrate. Great word. It means to attack someone's character. That's how I would say it. To say negative things about, particularly in a defamatory way. Yeah, attacking their character. To denigrate him. Deride, very similar. To ridicule, to mock. Deride usually has a connotation of mocking, jeering, derision. Denigrate is an attack, a serious, sinister attack. Derision or to deride someone is more of a mocking attack. To mock or ridicule, they say. Very good. Let's move down. Derivative. This is a great word, actually. It came up in my test. It means unoriginal. It derives from something else. It's not novel. It's not original. It's derivative. It's a bit of an insult. You're not new. You're just derivative. Your music is derivative. Just copying other people. They say imitates another work in a way that is unoriginal. Exactly. Desiccate, brilliant word. To dry out. A desiccated river is one that's dried out. The desiccated frame of the old man, wrinkled, dried out. Interesting word. What do they say? To dry out completely, to suck out the vitality, the life and the passion. A desiccated speech, dry, passionless. Desultory, interesting. That kind of means, what would I say that means? Kind of half-hearted, a desultory effort. Kind of you're not putting your full passion into it. It's kind of cursory. I did not look at that. That's exactly the word I used. Inconsistent, random. Wasn't as familiar with that second one. Inconsistent, random. Never knew that. Okay. Desultory, half-hearted. That's how I would call it. Detachment. Being detached from something. Showing detachment is not being emotionally engaged. Being a bit separate, aloof maybe. Objectivity or aloofness. Doing quite well here. Determinant. Interesting. I'm not quite sure. I would say the determinant factor is one that decides the result. Decisive. I'm not quite sure if that's what they're going for. Determinant. A strong factor in an outcome. I would say it's even more than that. It's not just a strong factor, it's the decisive factor, the one that makes the decision between yes or no, winning or losing. It's the determinant factor. A diatribe is a long rant. There's many words for that, actually. A jeremiad is another long rant. But yeah, a very common word for a long rant that someone might say is a diatribe. Interesting etymology there, I should look that up. A rant or angry speech denouncing someone or something. Yes, definitely a negative. You're not praising the speech. It's a very negative speech, and it's an insult to call someone's words a diatribe. Didactic, to do with learning. You learn a lot from something if it's didactic. They say educational with instructive purpose often includes element of moralizing. Okay, so often moral education perhaps. Diffident, I would say, means not confident, maybe a bit self-conscious, timid. Let's see what they say. Shy, timid, reserved due to lack of confidence. Exactly. Diffident. Kind of like the opposite of confident. That's how I remember it. Different from confident, diffident. Dilettante, great word, amateur. Oh, you're just a dilettante. You've only been trying it a few weeks. Someone who is an amateur, non-serious interest. Exactly. Dirge, what does that mean again? Dirge. I think that means like a long, mournful sound. Like you might play a dirge at a funeral, like a long, mournful sound of like the organ or something. Or maybe a speech is a dirge if it's so sad and solemn. A funeral or mourning lament, any sad, slow songs. That's kind of like a combination of what I just said. Funeral, often to do with funerals or mourning, like loss, dirge. Disabuse, great word. Often you use it in the context of the idiom, I want to disabuse you of the notion. It means remove your uncertainty about something, teach you something. I want to disabuse you, take away that notion, that idea that you had. You thought you were great at this game. I want to disabuse you of that notion, to convince you that you're wrong about that. What do they say? To dispel someone's illusions or false impressions about someone. So they might have an idea that you think is wrong, like an abuse of their mind, and you're disabusing that. You're taking away that wrongful notion, that illusion. Quite an interesting word, quite a hard one. You might want to take some time to think about how you'd use that, or look up more ways to use it in a sentence. Great word though. To discern is to grasp something, to comprehend it. I discerned her expression by gazing into her eyes. I discerned his plans by reading about them beforehand. Kind of like to grasp something, to perceive, they say, correct. A discrepancy is kind of like an inconsistency, maybe a contradiction, a paradox. What do they say? An inconsistency, exactly. It means one thing doesn't quite match up to the other. There's a discrepancy. Remember, dis is usually meaning bad. So a lot of these words, actually apart from discern, but a lot of these words are quite negative. Disinterested, very commonly misused. All the time I see it. Disinterested actually means impartial. It means without an interest one way or the other, unbiased. That's different from the word uninterested, which means you don't care, you're not interested in it. People often use disinterested when they mean to say uninterested. I am interested to see what they say actually. Exactly, there you go. The first one is objective, unbiased. It doesn't actually mean you don't care. It means you're objective, you're impartial, you're disinterested. A disinterested observer is one who doesn't have any stake. They're not invested in the outcome one way or the other. It doesn't mean they're not interested. That's the word uninterested. Now that I've cleared that up, to disparage someone, very like, what was that word we saw earlier? Deride. To attack someone or even denigrate. To disparage is to attack someone verbally. To put them down, or as they say, to belittle. Disparate means separate, not linked. How would they call it? Dissimilar to such a degree that comparison is not possible. Interesting. So not just separate, but not like each other to such a degree that you can't even compare them. Her two albums were so disparate, there's no point comparing them. Dispassionate, quite clear I think, without passion. Just very calm. They say impartial or cool. Disregard. Dis, not. So disregard, not having regard, not having care. You do something recklessly with great disregard. You don't care about the consequences. They say to ignore or pay no attention to disregard the rules, to not pay any attention to the rules, to be reckless. To dissemble, not a word I use that often, but I believe it means to lie. You wouldn't really grasp that from the etymology of what it looks like. But yeah, to dissemble, I guess you're not assembling the truth, so you're dissembling. You're misleading, concealing the truth. Okay, let's scroll down. Almost done with the D's. To disseminate is to spread out. So to spread literature, to spread an idea, you're disseminating. Like a seminal idea is one that spreads like seeds. So to disseminate is to spread out, to spread widely, they say, usually information. Dissonance, often as part of the phrase cognitive dissonance. Two things that don't quite match. So resonance is when music sounds great because it reverberates, it resonates with you. Dissonance is the opposite. It kind of sounds awkward, clashing, cringy. Cognitive dissonance is when there's two ideas that you can't quite match up in your head, so you're kind of confused. They say a clash between two elements that don't blend well, exactly. To diverge is to split off. Splitting in two, to diverge. You're not going down the same path, you're going down different paths now. You're diverging. To split apart, especially a road, okay. Dogma is a belief, a creed, and if you're dogmatic, you're like a hardcore follower of that creed, that belief, that principle. They say the official beliefs or tenets of a particular sect or group. I'd put it a bit wider than that. You can be dogmatic even if you're not part of a group, if you have a particular belief. To dupe someone is to fool them. To make them a dupe is therefore to make them a fool. I duped him with my scheme. I tricked him, I fooled him. They say to deceive or fool. Ebullient, great word. It means bubbling, brilliant, full of enthusiasm, ebullient, in an optimistic, outlandish kind of mood. That's how I think of it. Cheerful, enthusiastic, excited. There we go. Eccentric, someone might look at you if you're behaving in a particular ebullient way as an eccentric. Someone's a bit unusual, a bit weird, like why is he like that? Eccentric is kind of halfway between a compliment and an insult. Sometimes you can use it in a nice way. Oh, he's just a lovable eccentric. Sometimes you can use it in a harsh way. He's weird, a weird eccentric. Unusual, offbeat, quirky, they say. Eclectic is a great word. I love using this. I use it quite a lot. It means full of different elements. I have an eclectic music taste if I'm interested in rock and classical, which I am. An eclectic decoration of my house. One room's orange and the other room's blue, which is not. But anyway, eclectic, disparate elements, to use another word we learned today, composed of a variety of styles, themes, motifs, etc. Efficacy, great word. If you find yourself using the word effective too much, replace it with efficacy or being efficacious, having the right effect, being effective. You could ask what's the difference between efficacy and effectiveness, and I wouldn't know. You can look it up because I don't know. Very similar word. An elegy is like a mourn for someone who's died, maybe a written or verbal elegy, like you're mourning someone, you're saying their good aspects after they've died usually. Let's see what they say though. Sad poem or song, wow. Thought it might be anything written, but it seems like it has to be a poem or a song. I got the bit about remembrance of someone deceased, but I didn't know it was always a poem or a song. That's good to know. To elicit a response means to provoke. You provoke a response, you elicit a response. You got someone to do something, you elicited. And they use the exact phrase to provoke a response. Great minds think alike. Eloquence means being articulate. I believe that was a word we saw from the last video. Being able to speak clearly and explain things clearly, to have great eloquence. They add in the phrase persuasive, to be persuasive as well as articulate. Clear, concise, to the point, persuasive. Eminent means prominent, kind of paramount, superior. An eminent judge is one at the top of their field. An eminent lawyer is a well-known lawyer who rises above his or her peers. That's how I would say it. Well-known, respected, distinguished. Yeah, not normal, above the normal. Extraordinary, respected, distinguished. Empirical means to do with science and evidence. So you might have an idea that's just subjective, down to your opinion, but my idea is empirical. It's based on evidence and science. There you go, based on evidence. To emulate is to copy someone. I always wonder the difference between emulate and imitate. Someone can maybe write that in the comments, but I think emulate just means to kind of copy someone's behavior. What do they say? To imitate or attempt to equal in accomplishment. If they're using the word imitate, it does beg the question, what is the difference between emulate and imitate? But as far as you're concerned, just know that emulate is another way to say to imitate someone, to copy someone. Enervate. This is the first word that I probably wouldn't use myself. I wouldn't be confident enough. To enervate, I think, means to reduce the energy of, to like, not to make nervous, but to make weak, to reduce the energy, I think. I'd have to check that. To exhaust or drain of energy, yeah. But where would you use that in a sentence? I don't really know. I guess you could say, my attack enervated my opponent. Exhausted them, drained them of energy. There you go. To engender is to beget, to start something off, to kick it off. Or as they say, which is kind of better, to cause something, to give rise to something. Her article engendered plenty of critical response, caused it. To enhance is to reinforce, to highlight what you've already done. So to enhance something is to build up something that's already there, make it stronger or more superlative in some way. Better, maybe. The way they've explained it is quite nice. To intensify, increase, augment. Whatever's there, it gets more. It's increased. It's added to. It's augmented. An entitlement is something that you're born to. It's like a title that you're born to. Often that word is used to describe someone's sense of entitlement, as in they feel they're owed something, like the world should just give them something. I'm entitled to that job. I have a sense of entitlement. Often it's an attack on someone. He has a sense of entitlement because he thinks we should all just listen to him all the time. But why? Was he just born that way? How do they say? A belief that one deserves things that you have not earned. Yes, it's almost always an insult to say someone's got a sense of entitlement. Ephemeral. It's like a passing phenomenon. It doesn't last a long time. Great word comes up a lot in the GRE, of course, like all of these words. But yes, a short duration. As they say with a great word, transient, passing, short-lived. Let's go down. Equable. That's another word I wouldn't really use myself. My guess would be that it means equal, fair, like full of equity. Ooh, no, it doesn't really mean that. Okay, I have to correct myself. Equable means even-tempered. I would have used the word equanimity, which, is that coming up later? No, it's not. Equanimity means even-keeled. But they say equable is to be even-tempered, not given to changing much or varying. I did not know that. Okay, so take away what I said about equity. Equable means even-tempered, calm, unchanging. To equivocate is to deceive someone by not being clear about what you mean, to make them lose the trail, almost always with the connotation of trying to lie to someone or make them think something that's not actually true. So to equivocate is not about being necessarily ambiguous, it's worse than that. It's being ambiguous with the intention that the person gets the wrong end of the stick, gets the wrong idea basically. Erroneous, it's quite an easy one, just means full of errors. It's wrong, it's incorrect, it's erroneous. They say incorrect. Erudite is education. Someone is erudite if they are well educated, well read, etc. Full of erudition, education. That's a great one. Easy to remember. And they say learned. To eschew is to avoid. I eschew any alcohol. I don't touch it. You could maybe remember it or come up with your own mnemonic, but I think of it as I'm not going to chew that, I eschew it. I'm going to avoid it. I don't eat that kind of stuff. I don't drink that kind of stuff. I don't do that kind of stuff. To avoid, as they say, or abstain. Abstain being a word I think we saw in the first video. Estimable. Quite an old-fashioned word now. I'm surprised it comes up so often in the GRE. What does it mean again? Estimable. Like esteemed, like respectable. You're giving due deference to that person. You should see what they say. Deserving respect, esteem, and admiration. Yes. You esteem them. Sounds very similar. Estimable. They are deserving of esteem. Like you might have self-esteem, but if you esteem someone else, they become estimable, deserving respect. A eulogy, maybe I got mixed up between a eulogy and an elegy earlier, because a eulogy, I think, is something you read out in a funeral that could be written or spoken. What do they say? A memorial speech. Yes. Okay, so a speech, eulogy, a sad poem or song, elegy. Okay, let me get that clear in my head, Philip. Eulogy is the speech one, normally given at a funeral. Elegy is a sad poem or song, usually in mourning. Okay, I think I've got it. To exacerbate is to make a problem worse. I always link it somehow in my head to exaggerate. A problem's bad and you just made it a lot worse. You've exacerbated it. Exacting is kind of like punishing. Takes a lot out of you. Can't really link it to the word exact for some reason. I'd be interested to see what the etymology is, the history of the word. But something that's exacting takes a lot out of you. That's the best way I can describe it. They come up with some great words here. Challenging, demanding, demands a lot of you. Grueling, difficult, onerous, exacting. To exculpate is to prove someone is innocent. Get them off the hook, basically. As they say, to exonerate, to vindicate someone. Usually in maybe a court of law. Exigent is urgent. And the way I remember that, they both have gent at the end. Exigent, urgent. You might say, what's the difference between urgent and exigent? Again, I wouldn't know. But as far as you're concerned, and you can look up the difference, exigent is another way of saying urgent, pressing, time sensitive. To exonerate, I think we just did that, didn't we? We did exculpate. To exonerate, notice how X, by the way, EX, the beginning, often means to get out of something. To exonerate, exculpate, to exit, for example. But anyway, exonerate means to get someone off, right? So similar to exculpate, to clear of charges of wrongdoing. Again, you might ask me what's the difference between exonerate and exculpate? Not quite clear. There we go. If you look up the etymology of the word, you'll often find out the detailed history of how they're subtly different. But for now, they're close enough to be almost synonyms. Expatiate. I have no idea. Expatiate. I have no idea. Let's look at that. To elaborate on something in great detail. I have never heard that word in my entire life. Never heard of it. I can't even think of a good way to remember that. To expatiate, to elaborate in great detail. I guess it kind of looks a bit similar to the word patient. So you're taking your time. So to expatiate is to take your time patiently and explain something, to go into great detail. Never heard of that word. I'm surprised it came up so often. To explicate is to explain. An explication, an explanation. Again, probably subtle differences, but as far as we're concerned, are very close synonyms for the GRE. To explicate, to explain. An exposition, I thought that was kind of like a long explanation, like you're setting out the reasons for your argument. But let's check it up. There you go, a thorough explanation. Public show or fair. Oh right, yeah, the Shanghai Exposition, the Expo. Like a public show or fair where you present all your different materials and innovations, inventions. I wonder how that links exposition to an explanation. Two very different definitions there. Kind of good to know both, I guess. Often exposition in the second definition is shortened to Expo, the World Expo, for example. I guess one way of remembering the initial main definition is a shorter explanation. You can use the word explanation to explain. A longer one is an exposition, a full setting out of the position. Extraneous, irrelevant, immaterial, not particularly apposite to what's going on, not relevant. Or another great word they say there, irrelevant or superfluous, unnecessary. To extrapolate, great word. It means you've got a set of facts and you're going to use them to guess at what's coming next. You're interpreting the data and seeing where the data is heading. You're guessing results that aren't yet in your data set, but you can reasonably predict them based on your data set. Beyond the poles, extrapolate. The poles, the ends of your data, this goes beyond it. It's extra, it's beyond the poles. You're extrapolating. They say to estimate or conjecture, like predict, guess, about the future based on presently available information or facts. It's a nice way of putting it. On to the F's. Facetious, two-faced. Think of the way the word begins. With face, to be facetious, you're kind of being two-faced. You're saying something, but you're not actually meaning it. You're being, as they say, glib or flippant, kind of being sarcastic. You're saying one thing, but you're meaning a different thing. You're being facetious. Often someone might say something dodgy and then they just excuse it and go, oh, I was just being facetious. I was just kind of joking around, just being sarcastic. To facilitate something is to make it happen. You have the facilities to make it happen. You are facilitating something. As they say, to make something easier or simpler. Fallacious, based on a fallacy. Wrong, erroneous, incorrect, based on a false belief. Fastidious. Oh, do I know that? I think fastidious means being careful, being really scrupulous, but I'd have to check that. Meticulous, yeah, that means paying a lot of attention, being very careful. And then the second definition, interesting, is linking it to cleanliness, being clean. fastidious. Holding fast to cleanness and carefulness. Tidiousness. Look at the ending. Fastidious, tidious, meticulous. That's one way of remembering it. Keeping tidy. To fluctuate. To go one way then the other. Not sticking in one thing, not holding to one direction, but going up and down, oscillating, fluctuating, changing minute by minute. Shifting without apparent pattern. To ferment, like to ferment a revolution, means to instigate, to catalyze one, to galvanize something into happening. They say to foster unrest or discontent. So that's interesting. Even though I use the phrase to ferment a rebellion, I didn't know it was exclusively for unrest, discontent, rioting. I thought you could use it more widely, but it looks like ferment is a word particularly when you're galvanizing, catalyzing unrest, discontent among the public. Forestall is to stop something happening, to preempt it. For is linked to before, and stall is something not happening. So you're stalling something before it happens, you're forestalling it. You're holding it off, you're trying to prevent it, they say. Something is fortuitous if it's fortunate. Again, you might say, what's the difference in the words? Not quite sure, but fortuitous, you've got to admit, sounds pretty cool. Something is fortuitous if it's fortunate. Essentially, lucky, as they say. Frugal, our final word of the day today, means careful with your money. I try to be fairly frugal, not spending excessively, maybe saving up some money. It's again halfway between an insult and a compliment. You might describe yourself as frugal in a good way. Say you don't spend excessively, you're not ostentatious. But then someone else might call you frugal if you don't quite spend enough, maybe at restaurants or whatever. Either way, you are frugal. What do they say? Economical, thrifty, which is quite a positive way of describing it. And those are our words from D to F. That was really fun. If I get a big enough response to this video, I will keep going all the way to the end. It's fun for me to do. I hope you've learned plenty of words, and please do leave a like or a comment in response.